25. Betty Crocker cake mixes. Betty Crocker cake mixes ranked 25th because they represented an affordable path to celebration during lean times. In African-American households of the 1970s, these boxes promised homemade dignity without the expense of individual ingredients. You could transform a dollar box into a birthday cake, a church social contribution, or a Sunday dessert that made hard weeks feel momentarily sweeter. The mixes required only eggs, oil, and water, stretching limited budgets while maintaining the appearance of effort and care. For families navigating economic hardship, these boxes offered psychological relief alongside actual dessert. The positives were undeniable. Cake mixes democratized celebration, allowing poor families to participate in the rituals that marked life's milestones. They were foolproof enough for children to help, creating memories in kitchens where joy had to be manufactured from minimal resources. The negatives, however, centered on nutritional emptiness and the artificial aftertaste that no amount of frosting could completely mask. These cakes tasted like compromise, their chemical sweetness a constant reminder of what real baking required. Betty Crocker mixes occupy this low ranking because while they solved immediate problems, they represented the beginning of processed food dependency that would plague poor communities for decades. They worked, but they were merely adequate survival tools rather than genuine nourishment. 24. Store-brand cornflakes. Generic cornflakes in giant clear bags ranked 24th. The breakfast of absolute necessity. These flakes came without cartoon mascots, without individual packaging, without the promise of prizes. African-American families bought them because a massive bag cost what 2 small boxes of name-brand cereal did, and when you're feeding multiple children before school, mathematics trumps marketing every time. The bags were impossible to pour without creating avalanches across kitchen counters, and the flakes went stale within days of opening. But they filled bowls and bellies. The texture was aggressively mediocre. These flakes achieved sogginess within seconds of milk contact, transforming from crunchy to cardboard-like with depressing speed. Children learned to eat quickly, racing against the inevitable dissolution. Yet the positives existed in pure economics. One bag could last a family 2 weeks if portions were controlled, and when paired with government-issued powdered milk, breakfast happened regardless of the paycheck situation. In communities where food insecurity was constant, this reliability mattered more than taste. The negatives, however, extended beyond flavor. These generic cereals reminded children daily of their economic status, especially when classmates discussed Frosted Flakes or Cap'n Crunch. The psychological cost of poverty has a taste, and it tastes like generic cornflakes drowning in reconstituted milk. 23. Canned pork and beans. Canned pork and beans landed at 23, the protein source that required zero skill and minimal investment. In the 1970s, African-American households could purchase these cans for under 30 cents, and inside waited tender beans and sweet sauce with maybe a cube of actual pork floating somewhere. The beans were pre-cooked, requiring only heating, which mattered enormously in households where both parents worked multiple jobs and cooking time was a luxury nobody possessed. Additionally, the cultural context was significant. Beans had always been a staple in African-American cuisine, from field peas to black-eyed peas, but canned pork and beans represented the industrialization of traditional foodways. What grandmothers once simmered for hours now came from a can in 5 minutes. This was progress and loss simultaneously. The positives included convenience, affordability, and the beans' ability to stretch into multiple meals. Pour them over rice, serve them beside hot dogs, mix them into whatever casserole needed bulk. The negatives, on the other hand, centered on nutrition and taste. These beans swam in high-fructose corn syrup masquerading as tomato sauce, their sweetness cloying and artificial. The sodium content could season a week's worth of home cooking. The mysterious pork cube offered more questions than sustenance, yet families bought them repeatedly because when poverty forces you to choose between quick calories and slow starvation, you choose the can every time. This middling ranking acknowledges both their utility and their inadequacy. 22. Margarine. Margarine ranked 22nd, the butter imposter that fooled nobody but cost half as much. Brands like Parquet and Bluebonnet became household names in African-American communities, where real butter was a luxury reserved for special occasions or non-existent altogether. This hydrogenated oil product came in tubs, its nuclear yellow color achieved through artificial dyes rather than actual dairy. It spread easily, melted into casseroles, and topped pancakes while maintaining the fiction that you weren't sacrificing quality for affordability. In Black households of the 1970s, margarine represented a specific kind of compromise. Traditional Southern cooking relied heavily on butter, lard, and bacon grease for flavor, but economic pressure pushed families toward cheaper alternatives. Margarine became the daily reality, while butter remained the holiday dream. The positives were purely economic. Margarine lasted longer than butter, didn't require refrigeration as strictly, and could be used interchangeably in most recipes without disaster. It made vegetables tolerable for children, gave toast a slick surface for jelly, and contributed to the mouthfeel of poverty cuisine. The negatives, though, included health implications nobody fully understood in the 1970s. Trans fats would later be identified as dangerous, but poor families consumed them daily out of necessity. The taste was distinctly plastic, leaving an oily film on the tongue and a chemical aftertaste. Yet margarine's ubiquity in struggling households made it a shared experience, a unifying marker of economic status. 23. Canned salmon. In African-American households of the 1970s, fresh fish was often expensive or unavailable, but canned salmon offered omega-3s and protein in a shelf-stable format. The experience of opening these cans was memorable for all the wrong reasons. The liquid drained out pink and slightly cloudy. The salmon chunks came with skin still attached, and those tiny bones created textural surprises that children learned to navigate cautiously. Salmon patties became a cultural staple, partly from necessity, partly from ingenuity. Mix the canned fish with eggs, breadcrumbs, and onions, then fry them into crispy patties that stretched one can into dinner for 6 people. This was African-American culinary creativity born from constraint, transforming budget ingredients into something approaching comfort food. The positives included genuine nutritional value. Unlike many poverty foods, canned salmon delivered actual protein and healthy fats, making it one of the more defensible budget choices. The negatives were sensory. The smell of canned salmon permeated kitchens and clung to clothes, announcing economic status to anyone who walked through the door. The bones, while technically edible and calcium-rich, created a psychological barrier for children. The mushy texture also felt wrong compared to any other meat. This middle ranking acknowledges salmon's nutritional superiority while recognizing the compromises its consumption required. It was better than many alternatives, but it still tasted like poverty. 20. Cream of mushroom soup. In African-American households of the 1970s, Campbell's cream of mushroom soup cans were essential infrastructure. One can transformed a handful of ingredients into an entire dish. Mix it with green beans and fried onions for a holiday side. Stir it into ground beef and noodles for a weeknight dinner, or simply pour it over chicken and rice for Sunday supper. The soup's thick, salty consistency masked the absence of more expensive ingredients while providing the illusion of richness. The cultural adaptation was significant. Traditional African-American cooking relied on gravies and sauces made from pan drippings and careful simmering, but cream of mushroom soup offered a shortcut when time and ingredients were scarce. Working mothers especially embraced it as a tool for feeding families quickly after long shifts. The positives here centered on versatility and convenience. These cans could rescue almost any meal that needed moisture and flavor. They were cheap, lasting, and required zero culinary skill. The negatives, on the other hand, were nutritional and gastronomic. The soup was essentially sodium, flour, and chemicals shaped into something vaguely cream-like. The mushrooms were barely identifiable gray lumps. Fresh taste was nowhere in the equation. Yet this soup became so embedded in poverty cooking that entire generations associate it with home meals and family dinners. 19. Evaporated milk. Evaporated milk landed at 19, concentrated dairy that promised richness while delivering something distinctly metallic and off. In struggling African-American households, these small cans served multiple purposes. Add water to create drinking milk. Pour it straight into coffee for a cream substitute. Use it in baking to add moisture and fake luxury. The milk had been heated until 60% of its water content evaporated, then sealed in cans that could survive years on pantry shelves, waiting for the moment when fresh dairy wasn't an option. The cultural context here involves the broader issue of lactose intolerance in Black communities. Many African-American families experienced digestive issues with dairy products, yet evaporated milk's concentration somehow made it more tolerable, or at least no worse than fresh milk. It became the compromise position between no dairy and expensive fresh products. Positives in this product included extreme shelf stability and versatility. A single can could enhance multiple meals throughout the week, from breakfast coffee to dinner casseroles to weekend desserts. The negatives, though, were sensory and nutritional. Evaporated milk tasted wrong, like dairy that had been through trauma and never recovered. It lent a slightly sour tin can flavor to everything it touched. The concentration process destroyed much of the nutritional value, leaving behind mostly fat and calories. Yet families relied on it because it represented dairy accessibility in food deserts where fresh milk was expensive or unavailable. 18. Instant mashed potatoes. Instant mashed potatoes ranked 18th, the side dish that required only boiling water and surrender of dignity. Brands like Idahoan and Betty Crocker sold these flakes to African-American families as modern convenience, but they were really time-saving necessities for households where both parents worked and cooking had to happen in minutes rather than hours. The flakes came in boxes or pouches, looking like dried paint chips that promised to become fluffy potatoes through the magic of reconstitution. Just add hot water, butter if you had it, milk if you could spare it, and stir until the lumps are dissolved. The texture was the giveaway. Real mashed potatoes had variations, little chunks of potato, slight graininess that spoke to their origin. Instant potatoes achieved an unsettling uniformity, smooth and slightly gluey, like wallpaper paste that had been seasoned. Children could tell the difference, but learned not to complain when parents were doing their best with limited resources. The positives were speed and storage. Instant potatoes never spoiled, required no peeling or boiling, and could be prepared by anyone old enough to work a stove. In households juggling multiple jobs and multiple children, this mattered enormously. But, of course, there were negatives, which extended beyond taste. These potatoes represented another step away from traditional cooking, another convenience that eroded culinary skills and food knowledge. They were nutritionally inferior to real potatoes, stripped of fiber and nutrients during processing. Yet they appeared on tables throughout Black America, because survival sometimes means accepting the instant over the authentic. 17. Tang. In African-American households of the 1970s, Tang represented space-age sophistication at poverty prices. One jar of this powder could create gallons of orangish drink, making it exponentially cheaper than actual orange juice. The marketing was brilliant, associating this artificial concoction with astronauts and achievement, while selling it to families who could barely afford groceries. Children mixed it in pitchers, watching the powder dissolve into neon orange liquid that bore no resemblance to any citrus fruit but tasted sweet enough to disguise tap water. The cultural significance was complex. Orange juice had always been considered a luxury, something associated with wealthy families and weekend brunches. Tang democratized the orange juice experience. Even if that experience was fundamentally fake, Black children could drink something orange at breakfast and feel like they weren't completely missing out. The positives here centered on cost and convenience. Tang never spoiled, required no refrigeration before mixing, and made water exciting for children who otherwise might not hydrate properly. The negatives, however, were substantial. Tang was essentially vitamin C mixed with sugar and artificial flavoring, offering minimal nutritional value despite its fortification. The sweetness was cloying, the aftertaste chemical, the orange flavor a suggestion rather than reality. It stained everything it touched, from countertops to children's upper lips. This middle-tier ranking acknowledges Tang's role in making breakfast feel complete while recognizing its contribution to sugar dependence and the normalization of artificial food in poor communities. 16. Saltine crackers. Saltine crackers ranked 16th, the versatile carbohydrate that served as a bread substitute, a soup companion, and an emergency meal. In struggling African-American households, boxes of premium or sunshine crackers appeared in pantries with religious regularity. These simple squares of flour, water, and salt became infrastructure for poverty meals. Spread peanut butter on them for snacks, crumble them into soup for substance, layer them with cheese for pretend sandwiches. Eat them plain when nothing else was available. Their utility was limited only by imagination and desperation. The cultural adaptation was significant. Traditional African-American cuisine featured homemade biscuits and cornbread, but when time or ingredients prevented real baking, saltines filled the gap. They accompanied beans, soups, and stews in ways that echoed traditional breadstuffs, but required zero preparation. The positive sides of this item are the extreme affordability, indefinite shelf life, and adaptability. A single sleeve of saltines could stretch through multiple meals, and their bland taste meant they paired with anything without complaint. The negatives, on the other hand, centered on nutritional emptiness and the reminder of scarcity they represented. Saltines were basically empty calories, offering minimal nutrition beyond carbohydrates. They went stale quickly once opened, their few moments of crispness giving way to chewy sadness. Children eating saltines for dinner understood viscerally that times were hard. 15. Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid ranked 15th, the sugar water phenomenon that turned tap water into something children would actually drink. In African-American households of the 1970s, those packets cost mere pennies and transformed entire pitchers of water into neon-colored beverages: cherry, grape, lemon lime, and tropical punch. Each flavor promised refreshment while delivering primarily sugar and artificial color. The ritual was familiar across Black America. Mix the packet with a mountain of sugar, add water, stir until dissolved, refrigerate if possible. Serve to children who guzzled it gratefully. The cultural significance was enormous. Kool-Aid became so embedded in African American poverty culture that it spawned its own vocabulary and references. Drinking the Kool-Aid entered the lexicon through tragic circumstances, but the beverage itself was a daily reality in struggling households. It appeared at birthday parties, church gatherings, and summer afternoons when the heat made water inadequate. The positives were economic. Nothing else provided flavored drinks so cheaply or made water exciting for children who needed hydration, but resisted plain tap water. The negatives, however, were health-related and substantial. Kool-Aid was essentially colored sugar water, contributing to childhood obesity, diabetes, and dental problems in communities already facing health disparities. The sugar content was staggering, the nutritional value non-existent, and the artificial dyes questionable. Yet families bought it repeatedly because keeping children hydrated and happy mattered more than long-term health consequences that seemed abstract. 14. Hamburger Helper. Introduced by Betty Crocker in 1971, this product specifically targeted struggling households where meat was precious and stretching it was essential. In African American families of the 1970s, Hamburger Helper represented modern convenience intersecting with economic necessity. The box contained pasta shapes and a foil packet of powdered seasoning that promised to create everything from stroganoff to chili mac with minimal effort and maximum meat extension. The cultural adaptation involved substituting traditional African American meat dishes with these quick alternatives. Where grandmothers once slow-cooked tough cuts until tender, mothers now mixed powder with hamburger and called it dinner. The positives here included genuine convenience and affordable protein extension. 1 pound of ground beef, often the cheapest meat available, could feed 6 people when mixed with Helper. The pasta provided bulk, the seasoning provided flavor, and dinner happened in under 30 minutes. However, the negatives were there, and they centered on taste and nutrition. Pasta was always slightly gummy, the seasoning aggressively salty and artificial. The overall effect reminiscent of cafeteria food rather than home cooking. These meals were high in sodium, low in vegetables, and completely divorced from traditional foodways. Yet they appeared on tables throughout Black America because they worked. This ranking reflects Hamburger Helper's practical genius, balanced against its contribution to processed food dependency and the erosion of cooking skills in poor communities. It solved problems while creating new ones. 13. Hot dogs. Hot dogs ranked 13th, the mystery meat that fed millions of struggling families with minimal investment. In African American households of the 1970s, packages of hot dogs appeared with such regularity that they became background infrastructure for poverty meals. Oscar Mayer, Bar S, whatever was cheapest, these pink tubes contained mechanically separated meat products that nobody examined too closely because hunger didn't allow for squeamishness. Boiled, fried, microwaved, or eaten cold from the package, hot dogs required zero skill and provided quick protein. The versatility was remarkable. Hot dogs appeared in mac and cheese for extra protein. They floated in canned spaghetti for cheap bulk. They got sliced into beans, wrapped in biscuit dough, or simply placed in white bread with mustard. In Black communities, hot dogs transcended their processed origins to become fundamental building blocks of survival cuisine. The positives included extreme affordability and universal acceptance by children. Even the pickiest eaters would consume hot dogs, making them reliable weapons against food insecurity. The negatives were numerous. Hot dogs contained dubious ingredients, excessive sodium, questionable preservatives, and almost no nutritional value beyond calories and protein. They represented the industrialization of food at its most efficient and most disturbing. The texture was unnaturally uniform, the taste suspiciously consistent regardless of brand. Yet families purchased them religiously because they stretched thin budgets and prevented hungry children. 12. Bologna. Bologna landed at 12, the everyman's meat that could be fried, sliced thin, or stacked thick depending on desperation level. In struggling African American households, bologna represented meat accessibility. When ham and roast beef were financially impossible, the log could be purchased whole or pre-sliced, both options cheaper than almost any other protein. Fried bologna became a cultural staple in Black communities, the slices curling up in hot skillets into meat cups that could hold eggs or simply be sandwiched in white bread with mustard. Bologna sandwiches filled school lunchboxes throughout Black America, sometimes the only protein available for children during the school day. The lunchbox bologna sandwich became a marker of economic status, visible to classmates who had turkey or roast beef. Yet bologna also connected to traditional African American food culture, where making do with less required creativity and skill. Frying bologna elevated it beyond cold cuts, transforming cheap processed meat into something approaching breakfast meat. The positives included versatility, affordability, and near-universal availability. availability. The negatives, however, centered on quality and nutrition. Bologna was processed meat product containing more additives than actual meat, colored pink to suggest healthiness it didn't possess. The texture was suspiciously smooth, the flavor aggressively salty. The nutritional profile concerning: high in sodium and fat, low in actual nutrients, Bologna contributed to health problems in communities already facing cardiovascular disease and hypertension. This ranking reflects Bologna's cultural importance and practical utility, balanced against its questionable ingredients and health implications. It fed families, but at a cost beyond the price tag. 11. Canned tuna. In African-American households of the 1970s, canned tuna represented seafood accessibility when fresh fish was expensive or unavailable. The cans came in oil or water, though oil-packed was often cheaper and more satisfying despite the grease. Opening a can released that distinctive fishy smell that permeated kitchens and announced economic status. But families learned to live with it because tuna provided real protein at budget prices. The versatility was substantial. Tuna salad sandwiches became lunchtime staples, mixing the fish with mayo, pickles, and onions to stretch one can into 4 sandwiches. Tuna casseroles combined the fish with noodles, cream of mushroom soup, and sometimes cheese for complete dinners. Tuna patties fried in hot oil became fish cakes that passed for more expensive seafood. In Black communities, tuna adapted to traditional seasoning profiles, incorporating hot sauce and celery seed in ways that connected processed convenience to cultural taste preferences. The positives included genuine nutritional value and remarkable cost-effectiveness. However, the negatives were sensory and practical. Canned tuna smelled aggressively fishy, tasted metallic from the can, and had texture issues that made some children gag. The oil-packed version was greasier, the water-packed version drier, neither quite right. Mercury concerns would later emerge, but in the 1970s, families simply consumed it regularly out of necessity. It was better than many alternatives, but still marked families as struggling. 10. Spam. In many African-American households of the 1970s, Spam represented a shelf-stable protein that could survive an apocalypse and still be edible. The blue can required that iconic key-operated opener, winding around the rim to release a gelatinous brick of pink mystery meat. What exactly went into Spam remained unclear, but families didn't ask questions because it provided protein when fresh meat was impossible. Fried Spam became a legitimate breakfast meat in Black communities, developing crispy edges that almost disguised its processed nature. Sliced thin for sandwiches or cubed into fried rice and beans, Spam's versatility exceeded its reputation. Hawaiian communities had already elevated Spam to cultural icon status, but African-American families developed their own relationships with it based on necessity and creativity. The positives included indefinite shelf life, adaptability, and genuine protein content. Spam could be dressed up or down, featured or hidden, depending on available ingredients. The negatives were also substantial. Spam was aggressively salty, suspiciously uniform in texture, and questionable in composition. The sodium content was astronomical, the preservatives concerning, and the actual meat content debatable. Yet it appeared regularly in poor households because it solved the protein problem when everything else failed. This ranking reflects Spam's practical utility and cultural adaptation, balanced against its role as a symbol of poverty and its nutritional inadequacy. It fed families but represented the industrial food system's solution to poor people's hunger. 9. Boxed macaroni and cheese. Kraft mac and cheese ranked 9th, the blue box that became cultural shorthand for childhood poverty and comfort simultaneously. In African-American households of the 1970s, this product represented modern convenience meeting economic necessity. For minimal cost, the box provided pasta and a packet of neon orange powder that transformed into a cheesy sauce beloved by children and tolerated by adults. The preparation was simple enough for older children to handle, making it a teaching tool and time saver for working parents managing multiple jobs. Mac and cheese had deep roots in African-American cuisine, from Harlem Renaissance soul food to traditional Southern cooking. But Kraft's version industrialized and simplified the dish, making it accessible to families who couldn't afford the time or ingredients for traditional baked mac and cheese. The bright orange color became iconic, the artificial cheese flavor became nostalgic, and generations of Black children grew up associating this box with home and safety, even as adults recognized its nutritional poverty. The positives included extreme affordability, kid-friendly taste, and extraordinary versatility. Add hot dogs for protein, mix in canned tuna for a fish dinner, bake it with breadcrumbs for attempted elevation. The box could be transformed based on available ingredients and ambition levels. The negatives, however, centered on nutrition and quality. The pasta was refined flour, the cheese powder was chemicals and dyes, and the overall nutritional profile was abysmal. But even with that, this product fed millions of children and became embedded in Black food culture. 8. Pinto beans. Dried pinto beans landed at 8, the humble legume that connected poverty cooking to ancestral traditions. Bags of dried beans represented both affordable nutrition and cultural continuity. Beans had sustained enslaved Africans, freed people during Reconstruction, and black families through Jim Crow and beyond. They required time, something poor families often lacked, but rewarded patience with nourishment and volume. One bag could feed a family for days, providing protein and fiber when meat was scarce. The preparation ritual mattered culturally, sorting through beans to remove rocks and debris, soaking them overnight, and simmering them with onions and ham hocks or fatback. These steps connected modern black families to their ancestors, who had cooked the same ingredients under different circumstances. Beans served over rice became a complete protein, a scientific fact that grandmothers knew intuitively. The positives were substantial. Beans provided genuine nutrition, extreme affordability, cultural connection, and remarkable versatility. The negatives with this food were practical rather than substantive. Beans required planning and time. The soaking process could be forgotten, the cooking took hours, and dried beans waiting in the pantry didn't help immediate hunger. Yet beans remained central to African American poverty cooking because they worked on multiple levels simultaneously. This ranking reflects their superior nutrition, cultural significance, and traditional importance, balanced against the time requirements their preparation demanded. They were poverty food elevated by cultural meaning and nutritional reality. 7. Rice. In the 1970s, massive bags of long-grain white rice appeared in black households with the regularity of rent payments. Rice was mathematics, incredibly cheap, indefinitely storable, infinitely expandable, and nutritionally adequate when combined with other foods. 1 cup of dried rice became 3 cups of cooked rice, feeding multiple people from minimal investment. Rice wasn't traditional to West African diets in the same way it was to Asian cuisines, but it became embedded in African American food culture through the low-country rice cultivation history and its practical utility in poverty cooking. Rice and beans became a complete protein. Rice under gravy stretched expensive meat. Rice in soups added bulk. Rice as breakfast porridge with sugar provided morning fuel. Black families developed sophisticated rice dishes that elevated this simple grain through seasoning, technique, and tradition. The positives included superior nutrition compared to many poverty foods, extreme versatility, cultural adaptability, and reliability. Rice never spoiled if stored properly. It could be dressed up or down, and it provided genuine sustenance rather than empty calories. The negatives were minimal. White rice lacked the fiber and nutrients of brown rice, and eating it constantly could become monotonous. But despite this, rice's position in poverty cuisine was earned through merit. This ranking reflects its nutritional value, cultural importance, and practical utility. Rice wasn't just poverty food, it was smart food that happened to be affordable. 6. Oatmeal. Oatmeal landed at 6, the breakfast grain that connected struggle to sustenance and poverty to tradition. In African American households of the 1970s, large cylindrical containers of Quaker oats sat in pantries as breakfast insurance. Oatmeal was mathematics and mercy combined, cheap, nutritious, filling, and flexible. It could be prepared with just water when milk wasn't available, sweetened with whatever sugar could be spared, and enhanced with margarine or, on special days, real butter. This was a survival breakfast that actually provided nutrition. Oatmeal connected to traditional African American morning meals, to the porridges that sustained enslaved people, to the hot breakfasts that differentiated care from mere feeding. Mothers who served oatmeal were ensuring their children left for school with warm food in their bellies, providing both nutrition and love in a bowl. The ritual of preparation mattered. The stirring, the waiting for proper thickness, the careful sweetening that made poverty palatable. The positives were substantial. Genuine nutrition, including fiber and slow-releasing energy, extreme affordability that meant breakfast could happen daily regardless of financial situation, and versatility that allowed personalization based on available ingredients. The negatives, however, were the texture-based resistance from children and the time requirement for proper cooking. 5. Cabbage. Cabbage ranked 5th, a vegetable that stretched impossibly far and connected modern poverty cooking to traditional African American foodways. In struggling black households of the 1970s, heads of cabbage appeared regularly because they were cheap, lasted forever in refrigerators, and could transform into multiple dishes. Boiled with potatoes, fried with bacon, stuffed with rice and meat, shredded into slaw, cabbage was endlessly adaptable and remarkably forgiving of whatever cooking method desperation required. Cabbage appeared in traditional African American cuisine from slavery forward. ignored, one of the few vegetables enslaved people could grow and keep. It appeared in soul food restaurants and home kitchens, at church dinners and family reunions. Cabbage represented culinary continuity, connecting generations through shared dishes that evolved based on available resources but maintained cultural identity. Fried cabbage with fatback was poverty food and cultural tradition simultaneously. The positives here included genuine nutritional value with vitamins and fiber, extreme affordability, remarkable versatility, and cultural resonance. One head could feed a family multiple meals. It never spoiled quickly. It could be prepared simply or elaborately, based on time and skill. The negatives, on the other hand, centered on the distinctive smell of cooking cabbage that marked households and the vegetable's association with poverty that made some families avoid it. But outside of these, cabbage was a smart food that nourished bodies and connected families to tradition. 4. Cornmeal. In poor black households of the 1970s, bags of cornmeal were essential infrastructure for feeding families when wheat flour was too expensive or unavailable. Cornbread, the obvious application, connected modern poverty to historical sustenance. But cornmeal's versatility extended beyond bread. Fried mush for breakfast, corn cakes for dinner, coating for fried fish, base for spoon bread, thickener for stews. One bag provided weeks of carbohydrates and cultural connection. Corn had sustained indigenous peoples, then enslaved Africans, then freed black families through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and beyond. Cornmeal wasn't just poverty food, it was survival food elevated through technique and tradition into something beautiful. Black cooks developed cornbread recipes that varied by region, family, and available ingredients, but all shared the alchemy of transforming simple cornmeal into nourishment and comfort. The ritual of cornbread baking, mixing in cast iron, and achieving the proper crust connected families to their past while feeding their present. The positives were profound. Genuine nutrition, including fiber, extreme affordability, remarkable versatility, deep cultural significance, and the ability to create food that tasted good rather than merely adequate. Cornmeal made poverty meals taste like choice rather than necessity. The negatives were also minimal. Some children resisted its texture, and it required basic cooking skills. But apart from that, this ranking reflects cornmeal's superior position in African American poverty cuisine, representing the intersection of necessity, nutrition, culture, and skill. 3. Government cheese. Government cheese ranked third, the orange block that became a cultural icon and a survival tool simultaneously. In African American households of the 1970s, this 5-pound brick of processed cheese product arrived through welfare programs and food assistance, providing dairy nutrition to struggling families. The cheese came in plain cardboard boxes, dense enough to use as a doorstop and orange enough to glow in the dark. It didn't melt properly. Slicing required a sharp knife and patience, but it made meals possible when protein and calcium were scarce. Government cheese represented both help and stigma, nutrition and shame. It marked families as poor, as needy, as recipients of government assistance in a society that criminalized poverty. Yet, within black communities, government cheese became normalized, shared, and even joked about as a common experience that connected rather than divided. The cheese appeared in everything: grilled cheese sandwiches that held together family dinners, mac and cheese that stretched single boxes into full meals, and melted over vegetables to convince children to eat them. The positives included genuine nutrition with protein and calcium, absolute reliability once you qualified for assistance, and remarkable staying power. That block could last weeks, feeding families through entire months. The negatives only centered on taste, texture, and the psychological weight of marking oneself as poor. 2. Powdered milk. Powdered milk landed at second place, the chalky compromise that kept calcium flowing into children's bodies when fresh milk was a luxury. In struggling African American households of the 1970s, large cardboard boxes of carnation powdered milk sat in pantries like monuments to making do. The powder had to be mixed with water, stirred vigorously to eliminate clumps, and chilled to disguise its fundamental wrongness. It smelled dusty, tasted thin and slightly bitter, and coated tongues with disappointment. Children knew instantly it wasn't real milk, but parents insisted it was nutritionally equivalent while quietly acknowledging the lie. The cultural context was significant. Fresh milk spoiled quickly, required refrigeration that poor families might not have reliable access to, and cost more than struggling budgets allowed. Powdered milk solved multiple problems simultaneously. It lasted forever, required no refrigeration before mixing, cost substantially less than fresh, and provided the calcium and protein children needed. Black mothers mixed it for cereal, used it in cooking, and sometimes blended it half and half with fresh milk to stretch resources without completely sacrificing taste. The positives were purely practical. Powdered milk prevented malnutrition in children, enabled breakfast cereal to happen, made cooking possible when recipes required dairy, and represented accessible nutrition regardless of financial situation. The negatives were only sensory and psychological. It tasted wrong, reminded children daily of poverty, and represented the gap between what families could provide and what they wished to provide. 1. Peanut butter. Peanut butter ranked first, the protein-packed spread that transcended poverty to become universal nourishment. In African American households of the 1970s, jars of peanut butter, often generic brands with oil floating on top requiring vigorous stirring, represented affordable nutrition that could carry families through weeks of scarcity. Peanut butter sandwiches became lunchbox staples, after-school snacks, and sometimes dinner when nothing else was available. The spread provided protein, calories, and fat, the building blocks of survival when meat was unaffordable and hunger was constant. George Washington Carver, a black scientist, had promoted peanuts and developed numerous uses for them, making peanut butter part of African American scientific and agricultural heritage. Yet by the 1970s, peanut butter represented democratic nutrition, available to all regardless of economic status. Government commodity programs distributed large cans of peanut butter to poor families, ensuring this protein source reached children who needed it most. In black households, peanut butter transcended its poverty associations to become genuinely beloved. Mixed with jelly for classic sandwiches, spread on crackers for quick protein, or eaten straight from the jar when hunger was acute. The positives were overwhelming: genuine protein and healthy fats, extreme affordability, indefinite shelf life, universal appeal to children, versatility in preparation, and nutritional adequacy. Peanut butter could sustain children through school days, provide afternoon energy, and prevent malnutrition when money ran out before the month's end. The negatives were very minimal. Generic brands were grittier and required stirring. Some children had allergies, and its poverty associations carried stigma. But despite this, peanut butter earned its top ranking through sheer utility and impact. It was poverty food that actually nourished, comfort food that was genuinely comforting, and survival food that tasted good. Which of these old-school grocery staples would you still buy today? Let me know in the comments section. For more videos like this, click on this next card on your screen.